Hi everybody, I'm Mark Anderson with the iSpy Radio Show. We're going to get a little pinched on time here. I know Doug's got to go by 4. Just real quick, if you haven't heard iSpy Radio, we're on we're on stations on, let me try that one more time. We're on 4 stations in 3 out of the 4 corners in Oregon. We're up in the Portland area on KUYK 1360. We're down in Grants Pass, and then we're on 2 stations actually over on the eastern side of the mountain in Baker and Union counties. And if you don't live near one of those, we're trying to get into your area, but you can always listen online on any one of those. All 4 of our stations stream live, so you can tune in via the internet. And I think what I'll do is I'll just hand the mic to everybody. They can quickly introduce themselves again. And then I've got some questions that we can ask people, but I'd really like to throw this open to the audience, especially in terms of if there are things about this public lands transfer that you still aren't getting or aren't sure how this would work, what it would look like, that sort of thing, or even if you're hearing pushback from people, that's the kind of thing we need to talk about now. And so anyway, I'm going to just hand over the mic here to Rob.
Hello, my name is Rob Taylor. I come here from Bend in Oregon. I came quite a ways. In fact, I had to go through a town called Remote to get here, so if that tells you how far out I came. But I'm with a group called Coos County Watchdog. We're actually not a group or an organization. We are a network, a virtual network. And that's, I guess, so when they come to get us, we virtually won't exist, okay? But that's pretty much what I am and where I'm from. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Charles, President of Cascade Policy Institute, a free market think tank. We publish papers, we bring in speakers, we try and provide a lot of the intellectual ammunition for all kinds of folks who are fighting the good fight for freedom. And I'm involved in some land issues, one especially down actually in Coos County, and I'll talk about that in a little bit when I have a little more time.
Doug Breidenthal, I'm a commissioner. I'm actually the chairman of the Board of Commissioners with Jackson County, just south of us here. I'm also the vice president of the National Association of Counties Western Interstate Region, representing the interests of the counties for 15 western states. So this is a big issue on the western states, and I can tell you it also with the State Association of Counties is a little bit better. All right, just got to learn to talk straight into the microphone. Don't do it at an angle. So I'm also with the State Association of Counties, and I work with the state and national on the land use boards specifically. And it has been policy at this point in time with the State of Oregon Association and on the federal side through NACO, National Association of Counties, that we're looking for that transfer of the lands back to the states.
My name is Dennis Linthicum, and I'm a former Klamath County Commissioner, as well as today being the principal author for the Dirt Road Economist. Everything comes off a dirt road. Think about the world that we're enjoying today. It's all been managed with human wisdom, ingenuity, and creativity. That comes from the human element. If we were to leave this part to nature, it would be chaos and destroyed within a few years. You couldn't even recognize it for what we enjoy today. We need to get human wisdom back into the equation, in that we have been left out of the marketplace only because of private concerns for environmentalism above economic prosperity. It's time we put the shoe on the other foot, and I think we've got a great panel here today that will offer a lot of insight into that area.
Thanks, Dennis. So grateful for these guys. It's amazing what they're doing. I'm from the 33% colony of Utah. I'm here to secure opportunity for my children. I need your help.
Obviously, I'm Les Poole from Clackamas County, and I just want to mention that Dave Honeycutt was going to be here today. Unfortunately, we lost a family member. Dave's a great guy, and I suggest you always think about Measure 37 and about your property rights, because he's down there in the Marble Nut House year after year, very well respected. Our website is local-control.com, and Oregonians in Action is ona.org. I'm not Dave Honeycutt, but I'm the closest thing you're going to find today. And I want to tell you something. 15 years ago when I got involved, I didn't know any more than my neighbor. And now all of a sudden, as I've grown and worked with people like Jeff, worked with the Etheridges in Clackamas County and others, the things that we knew have now come to fruition. And we have an opportunity, because we don't have an opportunity until it gets bad out there. And when it gets bad out there, everybody wakes up. I'm one of you. I'm not doing anything that the rest of you couldn't do. So let's work together, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Everybody, take a seat. And what we'll do is, since we only have one mic, we'll have a mic runner that can bring the mic to you, or if you want to jump up here, that's fine too. So I'd actually like to start, this is kind of addressed towards Ken in a way, but actually if the county commissioners could jump in on this too, is I was listening to another radio station on Friday, and they were talking, can you hear okay back there? Is that any better? You'd think I would know this sort of thing, but up here it sounds very loud. So, yeah, and I'm also worried about feedback, so maybe what I'll do is move away from the speaker here. But anyway, I was listening to another radio station, and there was a certain caller that had called in and talking about this conference today. And what he was saying was, well, you know, he just got the words out about the public land transfer, and he got interrupted and saying, well, yeah, but we've got Kate Brown on our side, and so that's way worse than anything they're doing on the Fed level. So let's talk about that, because I think that's one of the things that here in Oregon we do look at that, because we know that we're dominated by the Portland area. We know that they outvote us most times, and so what would that mean if we transfer lands that are currently owned by the feds? What would that mean if we then transferred it to Oregon? Are we in a worse case? Are we in a worse off situation with that? So let me hand the phone here to Doug.
Well, who are we going to dial if it's a phone? First of all, I think it's important to understand that it's not owned by the feds. They are held in a public trust. That public trust is owned by the people. And the management is handed to them, and that management is the issue. So that I think that is the first part of it, is that we need to change the dialogue and say it's not owned by the feds. And that starts with everybody that's sitting here today. The transfer portion of it, everybody understands, I think, that it's impossible to do it to the counties. I hope you understand the way the laws work, that you cannot transfer those lands directly to a county. It has to go through a state. And that process has to happen very carefully through legislature, with the state of Oregon, and through the U.S. Congress. And that is something that it's a very clear path. The National Association, it is policy that we're looking to have that transfer done, but we're also saying that if we want it done in accordance with the county signing on to it at the same time. Because there's a lot of land out there that has no value. There may not be minerals in it, there may not be timber on it. But yet, as it transfers over, somebody's got to take the responsibility, the financial interest to manage that land. Right now, the pockets on the federal side are a lot deeper, and that's the biggest argument, is the cost on how that land is going to be, who's going to pay the bill. The counties don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to pay that bill. So the states are looking at this, and that's the biggest argument that you're seeing from state to state, is who's going to cover that bill. So that is the biggest crux of this whole problem right now as we look at this and where we're going to go. The politics in the state of Oregon right now are such that they may not want to see that transfer because of the current makeup of the legislature. So how we're going to move some of this stuff and how we're going to move the football down the field in this particular state is just keep the pressure on it. How many people just, I hate to say it like this because we're here in our own echo chamber. Everybody here has the same opinion on this issue. And I know everybody's saying how important it is to talk to each other on this issue, and it's great to network. But how many people here step out of the box and go talk to that liberal senator or the person who doesn't believe that transfer should happen? Because until you put the pressure there, the pressure between your friends and that you already get along with, I mean, seriously, it doesn't do anything. You might as well just sitting there talking in the mirror. So it's going to come the grassroots, and it's going to have to come from you. There's a lot of us that are working on this stuff, and the economics are so huge to the communities, to the industry, to everybody. And all I can say is there's like one person that hasn't been really noticed back here is I want to say something. Nick Smith, he's back here with AFR's Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities. And they have done so much to move this football on the management of these lands. It's amazing, but they don't get the credit for what they do. Nick, come up here, let everybody see you, first of all. It's okay. Don't be shy. But this man has done more. I mean, we did the Facebook thing, Ken. 46,000 people follow him on Facebook nationally. That's how influential the work he's doing to help move these lands around. So let's talk to him about getting outside that box and meeting people that you're not inside your own echo chamber.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I think the most important item in terms of knowing your rights is, as Doug just described it, it's a trust relationship. In other words, the federal government is basically, signed the contract to clean our pools every Wednesday. If we don't like the job he's doing, we certainly have the power, the authority, and the right to hire someone else to come by and do the pool cleaning. In terms, when you think of it in terms like that, the federal government is in this trust relationship, and we are the contract holder. We're the one who specifies what they can't do, the enumerated powers. We're the ones who tell them how much we're willing to pay for what they're accomplishing, or what we're not going to do, given the fact that they're in non-performance in this contract. So at some point, this is more of a belief system. This is where it takes you and I at the grassroots level changing our thinking to get the ball back in our hands. We've been given today by Ken, we've been given baseballs. Now it's our turn to go up, and will we use those effectively when we go to pitch? Will we use them effectively, or will we just lob up easy home run pitches to the other side and watch the ball as it gets knocked out of the park? At some point, what we have to be willing to do is brush the batter back, to throw a fastball, to offer a changeup, to put in a curve, something that's a slider that he was never expecting. And if we think of this as a tool, as a weapon, as an opportunity to excel, then we can do it. But it takes this mindset that says this land belongs to us. These resources belong to us within the boundary of the state of Oregon, within the boundaries of all these, quote, western states. And we need to step up to the bat and take this country back one step at a time.
Thanks, Dennis. I think Dennis and Doug were right on. Great to see Nick. Where did he go? I haven't met you in person yet. We've talked on the phone. He's doing a great job. Two things, okay? So number one, Oregon's not Utah, obviously, right? I mean, if our land was as pretty as this, we'd be fighting 100 times harder. This is amazing what you have here. But what Nick has done so effectively and what we did in Utah, even though politically we may not need to, we have overwhelming supermajorities in the House and the Senate. Governor, Attorney General are all Republican. We've got the ability to do things that maybe other states aren't able to do. But we still, in running this bill, we had people from both sides of the aisle co-sponsoring and voting for the bill, even in super red Utah. We had our school districts and superintendents association and teachers union and state school board supporting the bill. So we were able to reach out and find a bipartisan bridge. And some of the things that Nick is doing so well and so effectively, particularly for Oregon, is you look at the crisis. You have a crisis, as all states do. I think yours is particularly acute and visible because it's literally a burning fire. And so you look at the bipartisan bridges that you can build with educators, with public safety, with pensioners, with others, that you build that bridge and look at owning that future. That comes to the second point. When Governor Quinn was first elected in Illinois, he got in, actually looked at the finances, and one of his very first speeches he gave was, "We have a rendezvous with reality." Illinois was borrowing money from the pension fund to make their annual pension contributions. Chicago just got downgraded to junk bond status. I mean, there is a rendezvous with reality where Oregon, 50% of your state revenue, 50% of your state budget comes from a federal government that every year in the consolidated financial statement says it's unsustainable. Well, I got a great idea. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. That should work out really swell. No, we understand if it's unsustainable and that's 50% of your revenue, that affects teachers, that affects public safety, that affects everybody across the board. And so, number one, bipartisan bridges. Number two, help people understand there's a rendezvous with reality. I was just in D.C. last week, Senate Steering Committee, and they all know. They said, yeah, we're just pushing the can down the road until September, and then it all breaks loose again, and we're going to have to figure out some other game of smoke and mirrors to keep pushing the ball down the road financially because we're running out of runway. That's coming, and nobody's going to educate Oregon's kids from Washington. Nobody's going to take care of Oregon's sick and poor people from Washington. Nobody's going to take care of Oregon's public safety from Washington as we continue to run out of runway. So I think those two things as you move forward, that kind of bipartisan bridge, and then help people understand that nobody's coming to our rescue but us. And then you help present that opportunity. There is an opportunity to move forward on that.
Well, these gentlemen have covered the issue really well. I would just add that it's really important just to get the crux of the issue, get an understanding of it so you can share it with folks. And the way to share this with people is to talk about money and the economy. The easiest way to have a conversation and get some interest is to point out the economic impacts of what's going on because people relate to that. Everybody here woke up or was awake and got really engaged, and the Tea Party and AFP started when the economy collapsed. So economically, we're suffering. The date with destiny is here, and if we can't mine, we can't do anything in the forest at all, we're going to be in real trouble. I have a pen, I have a cell phone, and so do you.
That's going to get done in history.
I tell you. One thing I didn't mention a minute ago, and I need to go back and talk about, is everybody, I hear this tone about local control and how everybody's looking at the commissioners and their city councils and their local districts to do this work. You have to understand there's a lot of laws out there, and those laws on the federal side limit some of that on the federal land. As a commissioner, we're the only position in government that has exclusive executive power, has exclusive legislative powers, and quasi-judicial powers over all the land within our geographical jurisdiction. Now, that's quite a load that we bear on a regular basis. And in my county, at any one time, I'm half of a governing body. So how do we use that? How do I make sure that I represent the citizens of Jackson County as we look at management of these federal lands? Do we have authority to manage those lands? That's what's in question. And Representative Ivory has made some good arguments saying nobody necessarily has that authority, or the definition is ambiguous at best on the federal level. But one thing that we do know that they have to do is they have to cooperate and they have to coordinate with the local government. Health, safety, welfare, social, economic benefits. What does that mean? Conversation at the coffee shop? No. Conversation over a bargaining table? No. And that's where a lot of local government fails, because they don't understand what those federal laws are. And they read coordination, they read cooperation, and they think it's just a conversation, and they're going to go out and represent people. No, that's not how it works. You have to be able to write comprehensive plans that represent the county. Those plans are in writing and become a standard policy on how that county operates. A community wildfire protection plan is granted to us under the 2003 HIFRA. Now, that's a direct tie that says the county will and shall adopt this plan, and it shall become part of the federal program. Now, how does that work? The county has to bear the burden financial burden, write this plan, determine what that wildfire protection plan is going to look like. What are the health effects of that fire on the community? What are the social economic impacts? What happens as we move into this agro-tourism economy that everybody's talking about, but when the fire comes in, it shuts down all the industry? See, right now, that's not being quantified. No one's talking about that. No one's talking about the smoke effects on the people in the hospital when the forest fire moves through, the asthmatics, what the cost on the counties are, because our health departments are the ones that actually pay that bill for a lot of these people when they come visit us because they're having health problems. See, that nexus has yet to be bridged, and the counties across this nation have failed because they don't understand the complexity of these federal laws. So what we're working on right now is creating these plans and helping people understand how they work. What does your comprehensive plan look like? What does your travel management plan look like? Because that's what it's going to take to be able to work this process. And then currently, we have to work through the process to be able to convince the federal government, Forest Service, BLM, that they have to coordinate with us under FLTMA and cooperate with us under NEPA. That's a process that has to happen. And those plans are supposed to be, government to government are supposed to meet prior to any type of other program. And when I say that, I mean special interest groups. So the federal government, state, local, and tribal entities are supposed to come together with their written plans and whenever possible work out these details and then create whatever policy they're going to do and move forward. That's not happening today. And that's the problem, and that's the one point that has to be corrected here that nobody's addressing. That meeting never occurs. What happens is the federal government comes in, they say, oh, we're going to do the scoping for this project. By the way, here's everybody's announcement, and this is where we're going with it. And then all of a sudden, this environmental group, or this fisheries group, or this timber industry group, and then local government is noticed at the same exact time, and everybody gets to the table and they try to work this process out. That's not the way the law works. The law works as the governments get together, they develop what they're supposed to be doing, and then they move forward, and then everybody else gets their input. That's what's the problem. So, how do you help? You keep pressure on your local politicians that they keep pushing to have that coordination meeting. You put pressure on your local BLM and Forest Service when they ask for those input and those listening sessions, and you show up, because I know every single one of you show up to one of those listening sessions, right? Because if you don't, it doesn't do any good. I know the environmental groups are there every single time. I go to most of them, and I can tell you I have yet to see any of the faces in this crowd. None of you are making your input into those listening groups, and what the comment says should be, are you coordinating with your local government before you have this meeting right here? And if nobody's saying it, they're not going to do it. So I hear about everybody wanting to do something, but I'm not seeing people showing up, but I can tell you the other side is more active than you will ever imagine.
I'd like to add on that. We went to our commissioners in Coos County because I know Jackson County and Josephine County, I believe, have a coordination process. And how many of you know that coordination is a process? Like you said, it's just not a conversation. Coordination is where the federal government comes in. They have to directly contact your county commissioners and ask them or let them know what their plans are. We just had one in the Abandoned Marsh Mosquito Preserve where they're trying to reintroduce encephalitis and malaria. And that restoration project, they came in there and they sent out a letter to the landowners about a meeting. Of course, the letters didn't hit the landowners until 2 days after the meeting. So it was a little difficult for them to be there and complain about that. So you have to go to your county commissioners, and if you don't have a coordination process, and look up Fred Kelly Grant. He's the gentleman who created the coordination process, or actually discovered the coordination process, where they have to come and work with local groups, and you've got to force your commissioners to do that. We've tried to approach our commissioners, and we have one conservative who claims to be a Republican conservative who doesn't believe that it's his job to get involved with legislation from Salem or from the Washington, D.C. In fact, he told us that our constitutional rights is not part of his job. So you've got to convince these guys from the very beginning, and that means it takes political pressure. One of the next things we're going to be doing is filing an initiative, hopefully, to get that coordination process and force it on them. When I asked my two commissioners about it, they said the attorney is just capable of taking care of it. Their attorney is already overwhelmed and undereducated. In fact, while they were saying that, the attorney was standing over by their office catching M&M peanuts in his mouth, so I didn't have too much faith in the gentleman. But you have to initiate this, because the county commissioners don't want to do this. It's like your employees at work. If you don't ask them to sweep the floor, they're not going to sweep it. If they're right here, you have to talk to these guys, and I mean get up and get close. Put your arm around them. I've got a guy we're going to be recalling, and I know him by first name. I got him on speed dial. His name is John Sweet. And I guarantee you, when I walk in a room, he gets a cringe. But I make sure and put my arm around him, give him a big old handshake, and let him know it's okay. I don't have nothing personal against you. You're just working for the devil. So, you know, but not this gentleman here, but the gentleman I got to deal with, you know. So, you know, don't be afraid of these guys. You know, this guy is the guy I'm dealing with, and I'll be recalling he's one of the most important, influential political person in town, and I'll guarantee you my name will be mud by the time this is through, but I'd rather have my name be mud and still have my rights than no rights, and I don't care if they're calling me Charles. You know what I'm saying?
John Charles.
I'd just like to raise a little bit of a cautionary note about the transfer of public lands in Oregon. It raises the question, of course, if Oregon owned additional public lands, would it manage them better than the feds? And I think it's a pretty good reason to think no. And the reason I say that is because southwest of here, a short ways, is a 93,000 acre forest. Some of you may be familiar with it, the Elliott State Forest. And of the 93,000 acres, 84,000 are trust lands, state trust lands. And under the Oregon Constitution, those trust lands must be managed for the long-term benefit of the common schools. They are an endowment fund for public schools. So that is the number one obligation, is to make money through mostly timber harvesting. Money gets transferred to the Common School Fund, which right now has more than $1 billion of assets. The Common School Fund is managed by the Oregon Investment Council. Money is put into stocks and bonds, and then twice a year, every school district in the state gets a check, which is essentially like Christmas coming early, and the check is their share of earnings from the investments from the Common School Fund. And they never spend all of the earnings, so the corpus of the fund is constantly growing. Well, I've been writing about the Elliott State Forest for almost 20 years and predicting that due to the tsunami of Endangered Species Act litigation that started in the early 1990s, there would be a death spiral of earnings coming off of the Elliott State Forest. And indeed, there has been. And as long as the Department of Forestry / Business State Lands, they jointly manage it on behalf of the Land Board. The Land Board has ultimate jurisdiction. Who's on the Land Board? The three highest ranking officials in Oregon: the Governor, Secretary of State, and Treasurer. Well, under their so-called leadership, as long as it was making net $1, I guess they thought their fiduciary trust was being exercised. But in December 2013, they had to admit, finally, that, well, the death spiral is here. We actually lost almost $3 million simply owning this forest, because if you have an asset, it does require maintenance. And they lost money because they had almost no timber harvesting. In 2014, they lost about another $400,000. They're projecting to lose, they will lose money again in 2015. Well, once they went net negative, for even our three politicians, the highest ranking, they couldn't hide any longer. They had to admit they were breaching their fiduciary trust, and they needed a, quote, new business model. Well, they've been spending more than a year on a new business model. They've been going through all the options of what they might do. One of them could be to sell it entirely, to auction it off, and it has a estimated value of $500 million, or more or less. No one really knows what a market will bear until you allow a market to function. And that's the option they don't want to consider. We've published quite a few papers showing that actually under any reasonable scenario in the future, selling it would be a wonderful thing for the beneficiaries, the common schools. But we're open to other options too, if those options would make money for schools. And every time I go to a land board meeting every 2 months, and they have an update on this, it's pretty clear, none of their options are working. So I just want to clue you in that the next meeting, which is likely to be in Salem, and will be in August, they are going to start taking some more options off the table. After due diligence, it's pretty clear some options are not worth considering anymore. And to me, the only option, or the primary option left that would still work, that would make a lot of money for schools, would be to auction the forest off. Now, I don't know if everyone in the audience really likes the idea of privatization of a public asset, but to me, markets work really well, and I think that option needs to be seriously considered as part of the fiduciary obligation of the 3 highest ranking officials if they care about schools. Because when you're losing money on this asset, 93,000 acres, during one of the greatest bull markets of the last 50 years, all I can say is, blind monkeys throwing darts at a Wall Street Journal board could do better than these people were doing with losing money on this asset. So I think, I know you've probably heard it before, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Well, that sounds cynical, but it's true. You don't change the dominant paradigm until the crisis is so bad the politicians are too embarrassed. And right now, this is the crisis. The governor knows she can't keep losing money and calling that fiduciary trust. What might come of that is certainly an open question, and auctioning the forest is just one option. But the time is here. They're desperately squirming to avoid being seen on this. I encourage you to see them. Personally, I'm going from here down to Coos Bay tonight. I'm going to be touring the LA all day tomorrow. And in August, I'll be there at the land board meeting and watching them. And I encourage you can get on an email list for the LA State Forest. This is the crisis that will force some change. And everything related to public land management, how that gets managed, can the state of Oregon do any better job than the feds? All these things are sort of locked up here, and it's a very interesting time to be active on this issue.
Mark, can I be on that?
Sure. I think what John's pointing out is a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to activate and as he says, shine light on that situation and almost compel attention on what needs to be better management, and then that drives that discussion going forward. I mean, what an incredible opportunity to drive the debate. And that gives you all kinds of political opportunity as well, because you can go back, and I'm sure, John, you've got the numbers, you go back historically, I'm sure that was a very productive asset until there was a policy change. And it's not the asset that's changed, it's the policy that's changed. What a tremendous opportunity where you can show glaringly that failed policies fail. And then that's where you go back to where Nick and others, you start bringing in the school teachers and the others and say, wow, wouldn't it be nice if we continued to have more revenue for schools? You bring additional people to the table. But no, what a tremendous opportunity, because it's not the asset that is the problem, it's the policy. And I think incredible opportunity.
In terms of it being an incredible opportunity, the best part about that idea is let me just ask you, how long did it take you to drive here today? It took Diane and I 3.5 hours to get here today, because we live out in the middle of eastern Oregon. But I bet you that's as long away as Bandon. Nobody else took that much time. Now I'll answer this question. How long does it take you to get to Washington, D.C.? And once you get to Washington, D.C., how long does it take you to organize or arrange a meeting with your senator or your congressman? How long would it take you to get to Salem from here? Do you realize the power that you have with local control to get to your commissioner's office or to get to your state representative or state senator's office is just a couple of hours at most from the farthest end of Oregon? And you have that opportunity to get involved at the local level instead of having someone in a marbled hall 3,000 miles away dictating how we manage our lands. That's the best part of the opportunity of having it in state control. Sure, there's going to be questions, privatized or not. Those are great questions to have.
But if I could, you've got the opportunity pre-transfer to show how accountability at the local level matters. If you work to hold them accountable on what they already have, you've got the opportunity to show how local accountability matters. I think it's a great opportunity. Well, and I think Dennis absolutely nails it, is that it's a lot easier to change the people in Salem than it is for us to change the people in Washington, D.C. We can't. We're not in their election, in their electoral districts. We can't vote for them, but we can vote for the people in Salem. So at least if we can transfer the public lands here to Oregon, if we don't like how they're being managed, it's up to Oregonians then to do that. So absolutely right. I absolutely agree with you. One of you had mentioned, I forget exactly who it was, about the economy of this and using that as a means to talk to people. Was that you, Doug? I absolutely agree with you. Is that is where a lot of people's heads are. Is that when it comes down to you start talking about the economics of the matter, and that's really why we should be doing this. But I've noticed that in talking to a lot of people on the left, it doesn't matter sometimes when you talk to them about economics. What does matter to them is how they feel about the issue. How they, it's psychologically safe as an environmentalist to know that the forests are there and then I can go visit them. Do you? No. And yet you've got people in Klamath County and Jackson County, Josephine County that have depended on the forests for their economic activity. Well, guess what? It's not being replaced with welfare management from the feds. It's not the same. And plus, there's the dignity of work. That getting out there, this is hard work, this is blue-collar work, you're in the land, you are managing it, you know what it's like, you are part of the land. And yet, somehow, the left doesn't see that. It's somehow leaving that off limits is somehow more pure to do that than to get in there and actually harvest it. Well, if we took that approach with farming, guess what? All that corn would be still standing there, and it'd be rotting and falling into the ground, and nothing would ever happen. So anyway, how do we overcome the emotional blocks that those on the left have?
Well, it's certainly true that I'm told by people who advise us that we deal too much in facts and data is boring to tell stories. Okay, fine. There are stories to be told. I think the Elliott State Forest is a story. It's clear that the environmentalists who have misused and overused the Endangered Species Act, they've overreached. It's clear that they care much more about small birds than small kids. They really don't care about schools. They don't care about kids. They only care that this forest, this productive forest that's capable probably of sustainably cutting 60, 70 million board feet a year, is now down to practically nothing. They want it to be a museum. You can look, but you can't touch. They don't care about the dignity of the individuals. They don't care about schools. Earlier in my career, for 20 years, I actually worked in the mainstream environmental movement, and it pains me to say, but really a lot of these people, they're just mean. They're mean people. They don't care. They're a scorched earth victory, in a manner of speaking, is they're happy with it. So I think when you have a case like the Elliott State Forest, where, and frankly, it's so funny, really, to go to a land board meeting and watch the treasurer, the one guy in the state who's supposed to understand fiduciary trust, the Secretary of State, the governor, squirming and wishing they were in some other room because this is like a tar baby. They can't get rid of it. This issue, this dang constitutional requirement to make money for the schools, and it's a fiduciary trust, and they wish they were somewhere else. To me, I'm ready for the beer and popcorn to sit and just watch these. It's entertainment because they can't get out of it. And every 2 months, environmentalists show up whining about how we can't cut one little twig there. But this can be a story with many little sub-stories that can educate people about the type of problem we have in Oregon. And the only thing to get to your question, how do you combat stories and emotion? Well, we have stories, and we can be emotional as well, derived from fact.
we just had NOAA come down to our little part of the area, and they were going to try to create a marine sanctuary, or actually create a larger marine sanctuary off of Port Orford. And we went from all the ports to all the cities and all the counties, all the way from Brookings up here to Florence. And we got resolutions against the marine sanctuary. Well, the OPAC, the Ocean Policy Advisory Committee, they're basically what the Land Council is to the land, they are to the ocean. And once again, it's a centralized planning for Oregon. Well, they had a meeting and they invited a gentleman from the NOAA out here, a federal agent. And I asked him directly, you know, he's out here looking for people to create this sanctuary, but why aren't you taking into consideration all the resolutions that were passed by all of our elected representatives? And he basically said, with the county commissioners sitting there, the city councilors, and the port members, that they didn't understand the issue enough before them and that they voted on emotional issues and for emotional reasons. And I'll tell you, the guy barely made it out of Coos County without getting tarred and feathered. I explained to him, you know, at the end of it, after I really gave him a rough ride there, he says, "You really don't like the federal government." And I said, "Sir, you're $18 trillion in debt. You have a $3 trillion deficit. Each year you come out here and you complain that you don't have the money for the infrastructure and you need more money for that infrastructure, yet here you are asking to create more projects that you have infrastructure to take care of." It makes absolutely no sense. So when you're talking about fiduciary responsibilities, I want you to remember this. BLM has more public representatives, public officers, and public relations in Coos County than we have sheriff's deputies. So if you want a responsible government, you need to get it back to the hands of the locals, because we're not going to need those 30 PR people there to tell us how wonderful our mosquito preserve is, okay? And that would also help on getting some of this deficit down too, is eliminating a lot of these agencies and their responsibilities.
How do we address the conversation on emotions? First of all, I want to point the finger directly back at us. We're responsible for what's happening here. What we do is we come out there and all we do is we talk about money, 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 money. How do we pay for? How do we pay for? How do we pay for? I recently read a book. It's called The Righteous Mind. What it does, it breaks down moral psychology. And it looks at what the liberal mind and how it thinks and how it weighs decisions, and how the conservative mind and how it weighs decisions, and how the extreme right wing weighs its decisions. And what it talks about, and this is done through studies all over the country. On the far left, it's all emotional health safety type stuff, basic core. The conservative actually has the more broad thought process. They take 5 different legs of a stool and they put it all together and make a decision. And it's a very informed decision. The extreme right wing, it's just about money. So what's happening here is we've created a division between extreme right wing and extreme left. And it's so divisive that the moral concept of psychology, they have a hard time talking to each other because they just can't communicate. So we have created that in our messaging. So what do we do and how do we fix it? We change our messaging. How does that look? As a conservative, I believe in being able to do post-fire recovery. I believe that the forests are a natural resource that we can fund our schools, we can fund our local governments, we can do everything we're supposed to be doing with it. That's what it's intended for. 1937 Act in the ONC put it in place. The state forestry processes put it in place. That's what we're supposed to be doing. However, we can't just talk about money. When we talk about post-fire salvage, all the environmentalists think about is going in there and clear-cutting everything and getting rid of it. But what point in time do we sit back and say, reforestation? Where's the policy on federal lands that are reforested? We have state laws that have to reforest everything after they harvest and everything else that goes on. But there's no federal laws or policy that says they have to reforest. Currently, there's a piece just came out of Representative Bishop's committee that actually says that after a fire, they have to reforest 50% of that fire within 90 days. Now, how does that resonate to you? I mean, a show of hands, how many people like that? Yeah, it would make sense. The liberal side loves it. They like to see the more trees going in the ground. So what else do you do to that piece of policy? You tie a piece that says a categorical exclusion of 15,000 acres after a post-fire, or you tie those category exclusions, which basically bypasses all the environmental stuff and gives them the ability to do their work on 15,000 acres instead of just 5,000 acres. So after that fire, now you can come back at 15,000 acres, come back and clean that piece of property up, to prepare it to be reforested. And that's done within 90 days while the material is still viable. It can go to the mills. Because after a year, it's no longer any good for anything. So it's how we write our policy, first of all, and it's how we message that policy as we move forward. And I think too often, we get up there and we say what we're going to say, and it captures it on camera, and then the press picks it up, and they run with it, and next thing you know, we're demonized because the way we say it. And just understanding how we say it, and then respecting each other, knowing that we're still conservatives and we're all fighting for the same cause. And that's the second piece, is because we cannot eat our own on this issue. And we're so quick to eat ourselves and kill ourselves that this person didn't say it the way I wanted to hear it. You have to know that they're fixed and firm and resolute in their moral convictions, but yet you have to support them when they say it a little differently to be able to make sure that happens, because they have to message it for the other side.
I think your point is well taken, but there's another aspect to this that runs really deep, and the aspect is the federal government have an enumerated power? Does it have a responsibility and authority to manage federal forests? No. Well, look at this is an important question, because if it belongs to the state, then all those issues you're describing, all these policy statements belong to the state. And then we can have the discussion, we can bring light to bear on the issue, we can bring heat to the contract with regard to the Elliott Forest and any other forest that gets created. If it's not even within our bailiwick, we don't have the ability to manage it. We don't have the ability to take control of it. What we're stuck with is playing within NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, or we're playing according to FLPMA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act. We're playing according to the rules that they initiated, they designed, they built, they structured, and they organized. In other words, you and I are caught in this spider's web, and this big, fat, ugly spider is coming at our economy and will suck us dry. It's time we took control back. And this tangled web, getting deeper and deeper in this legislative management issue, isn't the answer. It's a fundamental answer. Where does the authority lie, and who should take it back, and who should be running with it? If it belongs to the federal government, great. Let them run the Navy, let them run the Army, let them run the Air Force. We're talking about managing our natural resources. The Klamath River system that flows through Klamath County and into Siskiyou County, that ought to be a bi-state alliance between California County of Siskiyou and Klamath County here in Oregon. That does not require a federal energy regulation. It does not require the Federal Clean Water Act initiative. What that requires is local management, local control, local voice, local heat, and local light. Bring light on the subject like John Charles was describing, and bring those guys in the chairs, make them squirm, because they're the ones who are performing this disservice to those trustees, which are our children, quite frankly. Our children and our grandchildren will bear the burden of this policy fiasco.
No, it's not yet.
So I got on the plane last night to come here, and I had a shirt on that had a little Utah House of Representatives logo on it. And so the stewardess asked me, "Are you famous? Should I know you?" I said, "Well, I don't know. It depends on if you read the papers in Utah." She asked me my name, and I told her my name, and she says, "No, I don't know you." I'm like, "Well, that's probably a good thing." And we chatted a little bit during the flight, and I was in the first row, so as the flight was going, she was sitting right there, and she said, well, what are you working on?" And I pulled out the little card, and I handed her the little card, and just said, "The red is the land controlled by the federal government. Do you think that looks equal? Does that seem fair and equal to you?" "Well, of course not." Well, and so basically, the promises that stated were the same, and it's already been done. These other states did it, but what's really important, back to the question, but what's really important is 5 million acres a year are just being burned because they're not managing the garden, like Mark was saying with the corn. We're not tending the garden, it's just burning, and that's burning millions of animals, and it's polluting the air, and it's destroying the water. In fact, in Utah, we've got the Huntington Canyon Blue Ribbon Fishery. It will never be the same in our lifetime. In fact, they can't even plant fish there anymore. And they try to plant fish and they just die because all the silt that's running off. And then what is really crazy is if we were managing that garden, the very process of managing the garden, we funded education. And we funded police and public safety. And I was just talking to her, but everybody around me, and I have no idea what their political persuasion is. I have no idea what her political persuasion is. But everyone around me is going, "Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the fires, and I don't like the animals losing their home, and I don't like the air being polluted, because I've seen that, and I've seen what that looks like, and I don't like my water being destroyed." And then you can talk about, oh, and by the way, the process of caring for that garden educates kids, and it funds police officers. Now, I don't know if that's the answer or not. But that experience seems to repeat over and over and over again. There's going to be a segment that is so far to the left, that is so invested in centralized control. They're the hyenas that work for SCAR, right? In that example, there are those people there that they're never coming. And for them, you just say, "Okay, what's your solution then? There is a problem. What's your solution to 5 million acres burning? What's your solution to these things happening?" Because there's a problem. People recognize there's a problem. In fact, Robert H. Nelson, one of the leading scholars, you've also got Sally Fairfax in Berkeley, Nelson's at University of Maryland, Perk, on and on. The science is settled that it's not working. The science is settled that we have an environmental crisis. The science is settled on that. Now, what are you going to do about it? One other thing that I'll just mention, part of the $2 million that the state of Utah has appropriated, we have both the special legal team, we also have what we call a relations team to build the coalitions and to do this very kind of messaging and outreach. And these are relations people on both sides of the aisle. We have very noted Democrat relations, government affairs types, Republican government affairs types. We have 2 different teams actually that are part of the teams that we've hired. So between now and December, you're going to see more and more of that kind of messaging help come out. But I think there is a crisis. That science is settled, and if we start there, there's no one that wants bad air. There's no one that wants animals to go homeless and be burned and water to be destroyed.
These are just a bunch of angry white guys. Now, how did you feel? How did that make you feel? You smiled, you laughed, because you know it's not true. When you start showing up, and they start attacking you, there's 2 things I can tell you from years of experience. And one is, if they're not attacking you, you're not getting to them. The other thing is, when they attack you, it's because they have no rational or reasonable response. They are so predictable, and it is just crazy for us to defend ourselves and be put on the defensive and not be in a situation where we're ready for it. And being ready for dealing with this emotion and this irrational nonsense doesn't mean getting ready to out-talk them, outthink them or rationalize with irrational people. The only way you're going to be able to communicate and deal with it is, number one, be ready, expect it, and ask questions back. He just mentioned asking questions. It's a stunning thing. I wish I had some video of us at the Clackamas County Commission when the far left was just selling us out. And here we were in a terrible economy. An associate and I started showing up, and there was never any response. When your 3 minutes and 3 seconds were up, they cut off the microphone, the chair said, next, and the toilet flushed, and you were done. Well, we got to the point where we realized that we need to hold them accountable, and you cannot come across like a bunch of angry white guys. So what we did is started calmly asking questions, and when you start asking questions that they can't answer, not trick questions, but very matter-of-fact, oh, by the way, why are you doing this? Or do you have the authority to do this? They'll start to back away. And when you ask a question at the microphone, and you sit there and wait for an answer, and they tell you your time's up, you back away from the microphone, you back away, and you look at them, your 3 minutes is still there. And asking questions of people who are being irrational is one of the best things you can do. If you don't believe me, ask a police officer, because that's the first thing they do when they're dealing with an irrational person. So don't be afraid to question authority, and keep in mind that when you're speaking to anyone, any place, you're going to have people that want to blow you off. So you certainly want to have enough passion and emotion to show that this is something that affects them. And if you can connect with people, if you can tell a story, if you can look at someone and get a feel for who it is I'm talking to, and listen to them first, and then respond, rather than the opposite, which is speak first and don't really listen afterwards, you'll get some connectivity, because I can assure you there are a heck of a lot of libertarians, non-affiliated voters, folks that have given up, that need people like us to make sense and not be reactionary and to be steadfast. The last thing is this: when people are attacking you, it's really not about you. So don't let that nonsense bother you. And talk to your friends and neighbors about issues. Tell them your story and ask them to tell you theirs. Ask them about what's happened to them in the past that was difficult, or have they had family members that have had a problem where the government shut the road down. A real quick thing I did in Damascus, a hotbed. It's ground zero for Metro's failings, the flaws in the Oregon land use plan, and yours truly owns property there. I showed up one day and the council was trying to pass this plan that all the citizens were opposed to. And it would have created the 200-foot wide buffers on a little tiny stream. We all know we need buffers. We need to protect the water. But I sat down and I said, now, if I was going to build a house in my backyard, and I had an acre here in Damascus, and I got not enough room for my driveway to get back there to that flag lot, I just kind of go ahead and put some of my driveway and put my fence a foot over your property line. I said, how many of you commissioners, counselors, how many of you in the audience would wait more than 2 days before you called a lawyer? See, it's your property, it comes home to roost, and you realize how important our property is. And when it seems like it's happening somewhere else, the old story of how, well, that's down the road, that doesn't affect me, that gets played in people's minds, and you have to break through that. Thank you very much.
For the record, I am not an angry white man. I identify as black. And I have scientific evidence of this because in all of the science books that I ever read, mankind evolved in Africa. So I identify as African. Okay, anyway, so you were talking about being attacked, and actually we are supposed to be done at 4, and we've gone through 2 questions in an hour and 10 minutes. So we're not progressing very quickly. What I would like to do is ask the audience if they have questions, and then we're going to have the panel be kind of self-monitoring. Maybe what I'll do is I'll throw down the mic, and the first one to grab it can, you guys can wrestle among yourselves to get it. But anyway, so among the audience, do you guys have some questions that have not been answered yet today? You, sir? Where's my mic runner?
I'm here.
Oh, never mind, he's going to beat you to it.
Why, if the federal lands come back to the state, we can't just have the private foresters who've been doing it for decades take it over, held to the standard with which they treat their own ground. There's no policy necessary, just give it to them, review it later.
Let's go that
Repeat the question. Repeat the question. Repeat, we couldn't hear.
You couldn't hear? You want to sum up your question real quick? Hold it right up like this.
Returning federal lands to the state, because there is nothing in the Constitution, federal, about forest lands, so it is up to the states. So in bringing the federal lands back to the state authority, jurisdiction, why can't the states just simply turn it over to the private foresters that are doing it now? We've got private people that have thousands of acres out there. They've taken care of it for decades. Hold them to the states, to their own personal standard of forestry. They've been doing the right thing all along.
So if I understand your question correct, it's we don't need to worry about setting up all these special state agencies and everything else. Just let the private landowners essentially come in and manage it because they're already doing it well. Is that about it?
Property management.
Property management. Who'd like to feel that?
Good way to put it.
Actually, the Oregon Forest Practices Act is actually established already and is working for industry. All those private landowners, they have that, and they're held to a higher standard for reforestation than the federal government. So that would be wonderful if the state would do that. So, I mean, it would be great. How do you make that happen? There's been talk about putting it into a trust, a local trust, so that is managed in such a way that those foresters of the private sector can actually have that type of process. But what happens even when it's transferred back to the state, there are environmental laws at the state of Oregon and endangered species laws and all that stuff that affect the Elliott State Forest. And to be frank with you, the problem that's happening on that forest is the marbled mulette moving in and out of Canada and Washington and basically populating areas they've never populated before. So unless you move it out of that state process somehow into a trust or into something, you'll never get to what you're asking for.
You can just stay there. We've got somebody to get the mic for you.
Testing. I understand, because my wife and I listened to Alex Jones, that last night the Trans-Pacific Partnership was snuck through because the mass media was, of course, talking about the South Carolina church massacre, so that nothing was in the news about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the reason why I'm bringing up the Trans-Pacific Partnership is we're facing a new reality where there will be foreign corporations that will come to the state, or for that matter, maybe even federal government agencies, and say, you can't have any of your rules, regulations, policies. You can't have any of those things that would stand in the way of us making our corporate fascist profit. Now, I say fascist. I'm not against capitalism. I love mom and pop capitalism. I don't like corporate fascist capitalism. And TPP now makes it possible for everything you talked about and hoped to be, suddenly it's thrown into the proverbial cocked hat, whatever a cocked hat is.
So what's your question then?
Okay, the question is,
what plans will you need to make to accommodate to this new menace of the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Do we even know what the language of that is?
Well, that's it. From now on, it's better to refer to it as, well, yeah, that's
It's
that's
law
it.
of the land, and we don't even know what the hell the law is?
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, you won't, but that's part of their plan, that you will only know when the government agency is being
Let you know.
sued. And then, of course, because it's a government and it can't spend money on having lawyers to go up against corporate fascist foreign corporations, suddenly the state agencies that might be wishing to use policies that we all agree we like, suddenly it doesn't make any difference because the Trans-Pacific Partnership is now given the hard blow. I'm saying, wait, what do you intend to do in the next couple of weeks to accommodate your plan, your program that you've been suggesting? What do you need to do in the next couple of weeks?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Here, let me do my best to kind of summarize it. Remember, what Ken has been talking about is, first of all, knowing your rights, because a right that you don't know can never be exercised. If you think all the way back to that simple concept, this is a football, gentlemen, right? This concept, this is a football. You've got to start there. Let me ask you a question. What makes ISIS so powerful? Is ISIS powerful because of their production capability? Is ISIS powerful because of their they're the financial center of the Middle East? Is ISIS powerful because they actually have oil and gas and natural resources at their fingertips? What makes ISIS powerful is a mindset. A mindset turns out to be the most powerful weapon we have. This is why Ken was admonishing us to get involved and know our rights so that we understand, because with that we are more powerful. Then we represent a more powerful force than they've ever imagined. Right now the TPP got passed, and by the way, there are 17 documents that are part of that will not get known until after 5 years of enforcement.
Wow.
So not only won't you know it once, the goodies come out, but, and this is all supposed, right? We don't, is that, maybe I'm misspeaking, maybe it's only 13 years, right? Maybe it's only 6 years, maybe it's 2 years. We have no idea. Is it 3 documents or 17 documents? Nobody has read it. And if your congressman read it, he had to surrender his cell phone and his notepad and go into a bunker somewhere. And if he took notes, they asked him to surrender his notes when he left after reading it.
Wow.
At some point, this is where this tangled web is doing nothing more than turning us into slaves to the federal status. The federal status enjoy this power. Earlier we heard it's not about the money, it's not about the resource, it's about the power. And the power is concentrated in Washington, D.C., and they like it that way. What we're asking for with the transfer of federal lands is transfer each of those powers to the 50 different states, to the 17 western states. Transfer actually air quality and water quality those states as well. There's no reason for EPA to rule the roost when every single state has its own Department of Environmental Quality. There's no reason for the U.S. Forest Service to rule the roost with federal land policy when every state has a Department of Forestry. We can take these ideas to our local senators, our local representatives. We can bring heat and light to bear on these topics and make the point that we're not willing to let this kind of stuff continue on our watch, because we know that our children and grandchildren will carry the burden. we know we're loading this into their backpacks and they'll never be able to carry the weight.
Paraphrase that question is, if I understand it correctly, is how do we prevent the mega corporations from coming in here and raping our land?
Here, here.
That's what I understood you to say. Here's the reality. Oregon Forest Practices Act actually keeps that in check right now. Industry right now has a higher regulation, higher standard than any type of federal side. The federal management right now, it's burning up, is going away, and it's having health effects and impacts to our communities. It's not being managed accordingly. Your local governments are dying and asking for tax increases because 25% of the revenue off the Forest Service is supposed to come back to the local government. 50% of the revenue off of all the BLM land is supposed to come back to the local government. The problem is that if you put it into the corporations, that revenue goes away and the local government doesn't do it, so you end up paying more taxes anyway. So there has to be something in place that meets the need to be able to privatize, and it has to do something to make sure that local government receives the taxation from that. I guess it's a revenue share in this particular case is what I'm saying, to be able to fund your essential services like police, fire, and your health safety.
And I think it also speaks to the whole notion of local control. You know, people that live on a farm aren't going to want to destroy that farm if their livelihood depends on it. So, and again, I know that this has been a big thing on the left in terms of the arguments against transferring public lands back to the states, is this notion of these big giant corporatists moving in. Can you address that? Because I'm sure you've heard that on the national level too.
Right, yeah, it's really fascinating when you think of how the West was established. I mean, it was hardworking people that the West was so challenging to establish in the first place. And yet, I think someone said it before, one of the greatest assets we have in our nation is the individual ingenuity, liberty. When you have the ability to let your imagination and your soul soar, and the incredible things that happen from that when you realize that you'll benefit from that liberty. We call that property. The benefit I can realize, whether I give someone something charitably or I give someone something and get something that I value greater in return, that's how wealth is created. That's where liberty and property are so connected. And so the thought, the argument is that, if you think about this, if you turn liberty loose, people will run amok. Jefferson said, I would much rather bear the risk of having too much liberty than too much government control. So kind of going back to the question here, we're in a situation where we're in Oregon 150 years as a public land state. Well, there's a way of dealing with that commons, that public asset. Alaska has a situation. Their former governor Wally Hickel wrote a book about the commons, the trust. But it's a matter of how you establish that trust and what the benefit is, and what you want to come out of that. In Utah, we have a situation on our school trust lands. We manage already 3.5 million acres of school trust lands. The objective on the school trust lands is pure income. There's a trust, and then there's a trust protector that has rights to sue and oversee, and if the manager of that trust land isn't doing the job that was set out, they have the right on behalf of the school children to protect and enforce the rights on that trust. Well, there are ways in the same process. It wouldn't be pure income. Again, you'd be balancing the environmental care and health, access and productivity, but in balancing those objectives, you have, again, local control on a trust and a trust protector to manage that outcome. And again, I go back to this Elliott Forest. What an incredible opportunity you have right now to ask the questions, relentlessly ask the questions, to hold your local officials accountable on what you already have established as a trust. You have the opportunity right now to prove that local control works or it doesn't. We know that the more that you escalate and put things farther away, and more obscure, the more prone it is to be adverse to liberty. But what a tremendous opportunity you have right now.
All right, real quick, and then we'll come. You'll probably be the last question for today.
We've created a market of compensation. A market of compensation, government compensations, functions on sustainability. You hear this all the time, sustainability. A market of true capitalism, and not corporatism or fascism where government gives nothing but crutches out to these companies. I'll give you an example, the LNG project. They would not be able to do that project if they did not get those tax incentives and they did not have the power of government to take eminent domain. I'm for the project, I'm against those two crutches because it creates a market of compensation based on sustainability. We need to get back to a market of competition based on adaptability. You eat or you die if you do not adapt, plain and simple.
Okay, one final question. And we got about 5 minutes for an answer. So I just have one of you answer.
Yeah.
This gentleman right here.
Yeah, Michael Warnken. I'm from California. I'm going to ask you. You're in the House of Representatives in Utah. I'll take it back. I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. The first argument in America was the issue of taxation without representation. Britain could lay a tax on America, and we didn't have anybody sitting in Parliament. And I think this is 1773, 1775, thereabouts. And they kept on raising taxes on sugar and tea and everything else. And by the time Parliament kind of came around and said, yeah, we really should give them, I don't know, something like, there were 5 million people, I think, in America, the 13 colonies. And they finally said, yeah, we should probably give them at least 3 votes in Parliament. And by the time they put somebody on a ship over to America to do that, we were already shooting. And when they created the first Constitution, they said 1 representative for every 40,000 people. And at the end of the convention, they said, yeah, 40,000 is not really adequate. 30,000 is representation, 40,000 is tyranny. And they sort of stayed up with that for a while until 1911 when they froze the U.S. House at 475 or 435 members. Population has more than tripled since then. So today each U.S. House member has about 735,000 people. And instead of adding more reps, we now add assistants. And the number that I've come up with is we have about 50,000 assistants. So in Washington, D.C., you elect 535 people that pick 30,000 assistants, and they have another 20,000 assistants in their home district. And it was about, I don't know, 5 years ago that, maybe a few more, that Abramoff got stuck in prison. And he was this huge lobbyist. And it turned out that he didn't even bribe the congressman. He started bribing all the assistants, because they're really the ones who write the bills.
Sir, could I get you to ask your question?
I am going to ask my question.
Thank you.
I believe, I just looked up my chart, you're in a district of 36,000 people. The best state in this nation is New Hampshire. They have 1 for every 3,000. They live free or die. In California, each assembly member represents 500,000. Is it possible that all these things that we're talking about, all the federal power, may be due to the fact that each member of the U.S. House now represents 750,000 people, which is 20 times more than what our founders said they should not represent. And perhaps our problem is we need to increase representation.
Sounds pretty damn good.
Yeah, one of the things that we've postulated, imagine the difference in the Bush v. Gore if Florida was still 90% federally controlled as it was for decades, right? I mean, for decades, Florida was sending resolutions. We're the worst off of all the western states because you're controlling all our land. If that was still the condition today, Bush v. Gore wouldn't have mattered because they wouldn't care about Florida because it would have maybe 1 or 2 representatives in Congress. So now your point is very valid. I mean, when you look at what's happening in the western states and their proportionate representation in Congress, we're at the mercy. And it's not just the western states. It's not just the western states because the western states are held hostage at any given moment when the federal government needs to grow. There's the ability to extract the votes from the west to grow whatever needs to happen in the east. When they created the states, they actually Congress went through very detailed analysis when they created the states, and they would look at the minerals, and they would look at the landscape, and they would look at the industry, they would look at the religion, and they looked at, was there enough in that state, and how big would a state need to be to have equal proportionate representation, power, and dignity with the other states as an equal footing. And so I think your point's very valid. There is a disproportionate representation because of the amount of land the federal government controls. Now, your larger point is kind of a different question on going to the overall representation in Congress. I mean, I think you raise a great point, right? When you've got, as you mentioned, 30,000 assistants that nobody votes for that really do make a lot of the decisions because it's just impossible. I mean, as a state representative, and I represent 38,000, and I don't have any staff, it's really challenging to try to be up on all of those issues. But there was something on, I don't know if you ever follow Zero Hedge. Any of you go to the Zero Hedge website? Pretty fascinating. They aggregate articles. There was something recently that over the last decade or so, the 200 largest corporations funded campaigns about $6 billion. The 200 largest funders, $6 billion in. Any guess on what came out?
100% re-election.
100%. $6 trillion came back in benefit from 4.4 trillion came back on $6 billion invested. 75,000% return on investment. I mean, that's a pretty good deal, right? I mean, if you can get that kind of return because you've centralized control, you've centralized the command structure, and you're really just investing in lobbying, well, that's a better return than you get by building a new product or innovating or competing. And that's really where centralizing governments have gone throughout history. You create this courtier class that all revolves around petty favors and gratuities out of a centralized government. That's where it just naturally, it doesn't matter which centralized government structure you look at, it can only go so far until you can't feed it anymore. And we're running out, there's a lot of signs that we're running out of runway in those things. So, I mean, you raise a great point. It has a number of implications for the land and then a broader point.
I would just add in a related issue, some of you may or may not know how the Electoral College or why they created the Electoral College. Back in the day, before I was born in 1812, back in the day, it was actually to protect the cities because there were far more people living in the rural areas, and the Electoral College obviously has a completely different dynamic, but they thought it through so well that even though now that's completely flipped in the cities and the urban area, you know, certainly has far more representation. The Electoral College, it was designed to provide what you're talking about, and I just appreciate everyone coming today. I've learned a lot from these angry white guys, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. It is 4 o'clock. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, just a couple of reminders. There's a whole bunch of materials in there. Ken Ivory's got a whole bunch of stuff on his booth. And make sure you get some of his materials out there. And you know, I would also like to say that as a radio guy, ispyradio.com, if you'd like to go visit some of our previous shows, a lot of them are archived there. Ken Ivory has been on there a number of times talking about the transfer of public lands. But we love, more than anything, to hear from you guys, because it's hard to stay up on all the different issues that are out there. And I can tell you, some of our best shows have come from people writing to us, hey, do you know about this issue? Or do you know about this issue? That lovely blonde back there is my wife, and she's also my producer. You can get a hold of us the easiest way if you've got something right now. I know that we need to get going, actually, because we've got a little dog that's terrified of all of you people out here. But we do need to get going. But the best way to get a hold of us is just simply carl@ispyradio.com or mark@ispyradio.com. We absolutely love to hear from you guys. And also, it's just a matter of staying in touch with all of these people. And all of us together here need to stay in touch, because we're always better off when we're working together than when we're running our own separate directions. So thank you, everybody, for being on the panel. Again, stop in and check out all of the information that's out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks again to our panel. Big round of applause for all of them. Thank you so much. Great information, great opinion. All right, friends, that concludes our program today. Thanks for being a part of our second Rally Around the Flag, and we're going to do this again